Hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion of the marketing information systems. Your text defines this as the structure of people, equipment, and procedures used to gather, analyze, and distribute information needed by an organization. Today we're going to talk about the process. We're going to go through some of the different types of secondary and primary information sources you can use. But for many of you, this will just be a quick review. You will have had a more detailed research methods class or a marketing research course that will go into far more detail. Earlier in the semester, we discussed the need to conduct environmental scanning to determine what was happening, what trends were going on in society, what things were impacting our entire industry, and so forth. This model, Figure 6.1, Components of a Marketing Information System, demonstrates that environmental scan and the look at the macro environment, the economy, politics, etc., our competitive environment within our industry, and then our own organizational environment within our own organization. That beginning point then is the input to the marketing information system. Your text discusses three important criteria for a successful marketing information system. The first one is that the information system should be objective. Management should be able to quantify and analyze the information gathered. There shouldn't be any bias in the process if decisions are going to be made based on the information generated from the system. Second, it needs to be systematic. It has to provide a continuous stream of information. So this is not something that you can do once and then wait 2 years and do it again. Information needs to be collected consistently and constantly so that you can look for trends over time and make decisions at various points in time. And then third is that it has to be useful. We don't want to collect everything. We want to collect only the information that's going to be of value to the organization, and that information has to be stored, categorized, so that when we need to go back and do an analysis, it's ready to go. Table 6.1 in your text has a comparison differentiating the primary and secondary sources on 5 different factors, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. What this screen does is summarize some of the advantages and disadvantages of using primary and secondary data. For example, primary data, this is the data that you collect currently for some kind of project that's going on at this time. The advantage is that it's going to be very specific because you know what you're looking for to answer this particular question or to design this particular project. You can get very specific information that will help you make important decisions. It's also highly reliable because you're collecting it for this particular project. The odds are very good that you're collecting material that would be very useful and specific to you. There are some disadvantages, of course. It's very costly and it takes a great deal of time to conduct this research. And it might also duplicate research that already exists, especially if this is an ongoing campaign, ongoing marketing efforts for a particular product line. If that's the case, you may already have the information that you need and you don't necessarily need to be collecting primary data. Your second option is secondary data. Secondary data has already been collected by another source or has been collected by you possibly at another time for another project. That data has then been made available to parties, and it can either be free access or it could be provided in a syndicated fashion where you pay for access to that particular material. The advantage of this is that it's a lot cheaper. In some cases it's free. It only costs you the time to find and access the information. The other part is it's timely, it's quick. The information has already been gathered, the research has already been done, so you can access it very quickly, and that speeds up the process of making decisions. The disadvantage, of course, is that you have to be very careful when you go look for this material to make sure that it's applicable to what you're working on. You might find some things that are tangentially related. You want to make sure that the things that you're finding really do apply to the project that you've got going. The second is that it may be outdated. You know, everything lives on the internet forever, and so if you find information, that doesn't necessarily mean the information is new enough, relevant enough, and reliable enough to be used in your particular project. So it's important that you know when the information was collected, how the information was collected, so that you can determine whether or not it's going to be of value to the decisions that you're going to make. Since many of you will have another research methods course that will go into greater detail on primary methods, I'm going to focus most of my discussion in this video on secondary data and talk a little bit about primary at the end. When you take a look at secondary data, there are two general categories. There's data that we collect within our organization, the internal data, and then there's external data that's available from a variety of sources, both of which can be very valuable depending upon the kind of information that you're looking for and the questions that you need to answer. One of the overlooked areas often is the internal data, the information that you already have. You have your guest histories and sales data. You know what the sales data is for a particular hotel. You know what the histories are of individuals who are members of your loyalty program, for example. You know what kinds of amenities they're interested in. And so if you have information like that, that internal data can be very helpful when you're making decisions. You also have employees and management staff who have firsthand experience of what's going on in the unit. So often if you want to know what's happening in a hotel, what the strengths and weaknesses are, ask the staff. The staff has great information about what's going on. They can also tell you what kinds of individuals normally stay there, length of stay, problems, opportunities that may be available that we hadn't thought of in the community. And then of course you have customer feedback, which used to involve customer comment cards, but it's gotten much more sophisticated than that with online analysis of postings on blogs and social media. We're getting a lot of feedback about customers. External data comes from a wide variety of sources. You have trade associations, travel bureaus, trade journals and periodicals, for example. Trade associations like the U.S. Travel Association, travel bureaus for different areas. You might have state or regional travel bureaus that provide a great deal of information. You have research that's been done by trade journals and other periodicals. And then of course you have your basic internet searches, you have more academic searches and university sources. Government sources are incredibly useful, and because it's government research, it's all publicly available. Things like the census for getting demographic information. When people think a lot about the census, they just think of the counting every 10 years, but the Census Bureau does an amazing amount of research, which is all publicly available. And then you have the information that you have to pay for. Syndicated services. These services, the information they provide, they charge for. It's a lot cheaper than if you had to do the research yourself, but again, you're not designing it specifically for your project, so you have to be very careful that the syndicated information that you're buying is actually appropriate, that it's timely, and so forth. And then there are sometimes some indexes and directories that can provide you some basic information. Some of this information from the indices and from syndicated services will give you information on what the potential is, business potential, can I increase share in a particular market or something of that nature. The last category of secondary data described on the previous slide was for guides or indices. This is an example of a guide. The guide is internet-based. In this case, it's offered by an academic institution. And you can go to information sources like this. This one and many, many of the others are free and publicly available. And they provide a great deal of data on the travel and tourism industry. And they have information breaking it down into different subcategories of the industry, information about travel, about demographics, and so forth, that can be incredibly useful as you're preparing information, preparing to do a project. You may notice if you take a look at the tabs that they have industry categories. They also break it down into, I have chosen trends and statistics, but the next tab over provides information on consumers and market research in this particular industry category. They have a link for associations. There's a great deal of information available to you from a variety of academic online sources, some of which are free and some of which you do have to pay to get access to. At this point, you may be asking yourself, okay, we know the two different types of research, two different broad categories, the primary and secondary, but why are we doing this research to begin with? There are a multitude of questions to be answered with marketing research in the travel and tourism sector, but they can be broken down into four basic categories or four purposes for conducting the research. One of them is to profile visitors, to profile potential visitors, and take a look basically at your target markets for a particular destination. The more we know about those individuals, the more we can customize their experience, and remember how important experience is in the service sector. We can also create messages that will appeal to them, that will resonate with them, and we also have a better idea of what kind of channels we can use to communicate with them as they're going through the decision-making process of traveling or choosing a destination to go to. The second type is the economic impact study. These studies try to determine what the economic impact is of travel and tourism to a particular sector. Some of them also break it down into what the the return on investment would be for different types of investments for new programs. A third category is research on a destination's attributes or characteristics. Again, if we're going to try and attract visitors to a destination, we need to know what it is about this destination that might attract them. Think in terms of the unique selling proposition that we've talked about earlier. What is it about this destination that people would be interested in seeing, doing, experiencing? Because the experience is such a critical part of this process, we need to know what this destination has to offer individuals so that we can choose the right kind of individuals for that experience. And then finally, the marketing mix. We need to be able to do some research to determine what types of marketing tools or vehicles we're going to use to get our message out, and when those vehicles will be applied, and what stage of the consumer decision making or the consumer buying process we're going to try and touch these individuals with information that will encourage them to come to our destination. So the next few slides, I think I'm going to be giving you some examples of these different types of studies. So keep in mind these four objectives or the four purposes for doing destination research.
Operating in any business, in any sector, in any location is challenging. You've got competitors, you've got a whole range of forces that you need to deal with. If you can get the edge through having a better understanding of the place that you're operating in, of your customers, of the environment in which you're operating, that's going to place you best for future success.
We actually went to the tourism industry and we asked our partners what they wanted. They said, look, one of the things we really don't know is where people actually go. The Tourism Tracking Project is really about understanding where different types of people go. We tracked them using a smartphone. The app contained a GPS technology, so we tracked them as they moved around the state. This is real time, it's accurate down to 10 metres, and the detail of data is just tremendous.
We've always known a little bit about our visitors, but we haven't got down to the really fine-grained information. The university, through Sense-T, clearly had the capability to provide insights that are really critical for industry and for government to make decisions.
This is the largest study of its type ever to be done across an entire region, and it's also the largest study of its type in terms of the time that we've tracked people for, because prior to this study they'd only ever managed to successfully track tourists for 1 to 2 days. So to be able to track them for 14 days was a world first. Now we understand how people use infrastructure. Now we have data that can actually test the success of marketing campaigns, and now we can also understand what drives decisions. You know, what are the risky aspects of tourism? The impact that this research has had has been really significant, both industry impact and also academic impact.
This is a really exciting project, and one that, to be frank, will give Tasmania a jump on its competitors. This sort of information is going to allow us as a state to probably understand our visitors better than anywhere else in the world.
This fascinating tourism research project from Tasmania gives you an example of how contemporary research is being conducted to gather data to really help them craft tourism research, craft tourism marketing campaigns. This particular one hit several of the objectives that we talked about earlier. Clearly, it's a profile of the visitors, the target market. This one could track people who were visiting the state of Tasmania for 14 days. That kind of information is incredibly useful. It also, because they were tracking what these individuals are using, it gave them information on the kinds of destinations they were going to, the order that they were going, the infrastructure usage. So it told you by their movement what they were interested in. So what were the destination's attributes or characteristics that these visitors were most attracted to? And then finally, it gave them information on who actually came, so they could determine if they changed their marketing mix to emphasize maybe a particular destination in Tasmania. They could check to see whether or not that was reflected in the movement of the people who were actually visiting. The second objective for travel and tourism research, as discussed earlier, was economic impact studies. Economic impact studies come with a variety of types, but they basically break down into these three types, or report these three types of information. One of them is the direct effect, and it refers to the effect brought on by the actual establishments, like the number of employees, where tourists are spending their money. The indirect effect is the result that's caused by all of the other organizations in society that need to exist to support the tourism operations of the direct effect. So the results of the needs of the tourism sectors to purchase from other industries. Other industries need to exist to provide support services for the tourism industry. And then there's the induced effect, and that's the income level increase as a result of tourism. How much does that induce or increase the overall income level of the tourism operations? Here's an example, a local example, of an economic impact study from the state of South Dakota. They constantly publish numbers, but they do an annual review. This report from January of 2020 gives us a review of the tourism numbers from 2019. And as you can see, 2019, despite the fact that it started slowly because of some weather situations, turned out to be a pretty banner year. According to the annual study done, they found that there were 14.5 million visitors to the state, an increase of 3.1% in 2019 over 2018. And that was the highest growth percentage the state has experienced in 5 years. Visitors to South Dakota spent $4.1 billion, which was an increase of 2.8% over the previous year. So you can see from these numbers that the economic impact of travel and tourism is massive. The third objective or purpose for research was to study the destination image. Destination image studies are designed to discover the individual's perceptions of a particular destination, because those perceptions of the image are going to impact whether or not they decide to go to a particular destination. If we go back for a minute and look at that tourism tracking project, one of the things that they had in there was this particular slide showing you a graphic of the state of Tasmania and the different portions of it. and they tracked why people were going to each of these destinations. So they had to experience food and beverages, to experience art and culture, to experience history and heritage, etc. And so by tracking this, you could see, for example, why someone would want to go to a particular destination. What is the image of that destination? Do you go to a particular place to experience food and beverages, or do you go to a particular place to visit with friends and relatives, or to see wildlife? This kind of information is particularly valuable because if you know what people are looking for on their trip, then you can find those elements of a destination and direct them to those particular locations that satisfy what they're looking for. The fourth type of research that was discussed is conversion studies. Conversion studies are done in every industry. It's not unique to tourism, but the purpose of the conversion study is to check the effectiveness of the marketing campaign. So you're trying to determine whether their advertising and promotions were effective at bringing people in, establishing a proper perception of the destination, and so forth. One of the things that they note in the book is that inquiries, people's inquiries into a destination, come through three main sources: the telephone, the website, and drop cards placed in magazines. That'll give you an idea of how dated maybe this book is on some things. So the question is this still true? Do people still inquire or get information about a destination from the telephone, the website, and drop cards placed in magazines? I think most people would agree that maybe websites, but I don't know that telephones and magazine cards are used all that much anymore. And of course, they're ignoring all the social media aspects and information that goes out. Not only do destinations provide information through social media, but of course, all kinds of friends, colleagues, people you're connected with are on social media talking about destination. So all of these information sources are part of a general communication campaign that's conducted, and the purpose of a conversion study is to see how your efforts, and sometimes the efforts that you don't do, so third-party efforts, have impacted travel, conversion, inquiries, and whether or not individuals actually show up at a destination. If you're looking for a fun activity to do during all of your downtime, I suggest that maybe you look for some tourism research reports to see whether or not you can find examples of target market profiles, economic impact, destination image studies, or maybe conversion studies through a variety of secondary information sources. I'm going to note two of them here. One of them is the U.S. Travel Association, which is ustravel.org. That particular website of the Travel Association provides a great deal of information, a lot of research information. Much of it is behind a paywall that's for members only, but there is a lot of information publicly available on there trying to encourage people or to talk about the importance of travel and tourism to the United States economy. The other place that I'd suggest you turn is to a website called Skift, skift.com. Skift is a pay site. They are a syndicated site, but they do provide a lot of free information. Normally what they do is they put things behind a paywall and they charge you for access to the information for a while. So for a period of time, a year or two, the information is for sale. But then after that time, they start releasing it. And so you can get access to information, and some of this information is pretty evergreen. It lasts for quite a while. And also the information will give you a good deal of background on particular subjects. So I suggest you check out US Travel and Skift.com and see if you can find examples of tourism research that would be available on secondary data. With a quick review of the U.S. Travel Association's website, you'll likely find a number of economic impact reports or travel forecast reports indicating the economic impact, what direction the dollars are going, as well as the number of people traveling, where they're traveling to, etc. This September 3rd, 2020 article was previewed this way, as by the numbers. World Travel and Tourism Council released their 2020 estimate of international travel, and as will come to no surprise to anyone because of the pandemic, their estimates are that there would be a large loss to the U.S. economy. Here is an example of a blog by Andrew Graft on Access that provides an incredible amount of information, travel and tourism statistics, and it collects it from a variety of different sources and then links you to those sources. Here is the list of the 6 categories where they have information, and then you can see I have an example of just one of the categories, of just some of the topics underneath. And each of these points, bullet points, some statistics related to travel and tourism, but then they also link you to the original source of it so that you can go and get additional information if you desire. I mentioned earlier that when you were using secondary data, one of the things that you had to be very careful of was choosing data that was appropriate for the questions that you're asking. Your text suggests there are certain guidelines for collecting secondary data from external sources, and it goes through this 5-step process where the first couple of steps involve you clearly defining what it is that you're looking for. Until you do that and develop a plan for that, then you can't start looking for data. The third step then is the collection and analysis of the data, the information from external sources, and then finally the preparation of your report. But the key here is to know specifically what your goals and objectives are so that you can collect relevant data. When you're conducting marketing research, particularly primary research, there are 3 general purposes that you can be conducting the research to achieve. One of them is called exploratory research, and that's to gain an understanding of the nature of a problem. This is usually used at the beginning stages where we don't know an awful lot about a topic. So a lot of the research that was done in the past few years related to social media marketing has been exploratory in nature because some of the other marketing rules that apply to other channels don't work well with social media. The second category is descriptive research, and it answers basic questions of who, what, when, where, why. Questions that you have of who should we be targeting, when is a good time in the consideration stage of consumers to reach them with this particular message. So these are descriptions of what we should be doing, what actions we should be taking. The third category is less used and involves often much more work and much more careful preparation, and that's causal research. And this focuses on defining a cause and effect relationship. You have to be able to not just simply describe what's going on or to describe how people feel about something, but you have to be able to demonstrate that a particular action will result in a particular effect. And this often involves experimental research. If you are going to be conducting exploratory, descriptive, or causal research, one of the first questions you'll have to ask yourself after determining your goals and objectives for the research is how I'm going to collect the data. The image on the right side is from QuestionPro, a marketing research service, and they highlight the 5 types of data collection techniques that they use in their reports. These match fairly closely to the ones that are talked about in your text because they're fairly standard across the industry. You'll notice that the QuestionPro has one category of usage data, which is generally an internal information source, whereas most of the other 4 are primarily external. Your text lists these 3 different broad categories. You can use experiments, which as I mentioned before are focused a lot on causal research. You can use observation of a variety of types. And then they have surveys. And we often use the term surveys to apply to print or online questions that are asked to people. That's really more of a questionnaire, which is a form of a survey. You can do surveys by direct mail. That includes email. You can use telephone surveys, personal interview surveys, or comment cards. All of these are various forms of just asking people for their opinions and collecting information which is more likely to be used for descriptive or exploratory research than it is for causal. I'm going to wrap up what I'm going to discuss related to marketing information systems and marketing research with a couple of slides that focus on the advantages and disadvantages of the different types of data collection. This graphic that we have here from Question Pro highlights the things that they think are positive and negative about three very common forms of data collection: phone surveys, online surveys, and in-person interviews. And they note that phone surveys, you can have a high confidence in the results, but they are expensive and you usually have to hire an agency to conduct them. Online surveys can be managed by yourself. The data is generally very accurate because whatever the person types in online is automatically entered into the data set. You do need to have the internet, however, for online surveys, which limits individuals who do not have access to the internet or are less likely to use the internet to participate in the online survey. And then the third category is in-person interviews. The beauty of an in-person interview is the depth you can go into with the questions. You can probe and follow up on information that you need, but they are very time-consuming and because of that are also very expensive. So there's the trade-off. It's what kind of information that you need, the quality of that information, compared to the resources that you have available. The table on this slide presents a much more detailed analysis of the advantages and disadvantages of the four main types of survey data collection. It's similar to the table that you'll see on table 6.2 in your text. I've just changed one of the columns in the order. And as you can see, there are both positive and negative characteristics. So we start at the top with cost per response. That would be a negative, so the higher that is, the higher the cost. Versus questions below, which does it allow feedback, can it handle sensitive topics, and so forth. The higher those are, the better that they are. And so often what you're doing is a trade-off for the amount of resources and time that you have available. What's the best quality information that you can get, and also based on the subject of what you're trying to get. So if you need information very quickly, you're probably not going to be able to do a phone survey or personal interviews. You're probably going to have to go with a mail survey or an email direct distribution. If you want a high response rate, then an email, mail, electronic survey is not the way to go. You'd want to turn to personal interviews or maybe the phone survey because you're much more likely to get people to respond. And so you can see by looking at those characteristics that are listed on the left, you can determine which of the four methods here would be the best method to use for the topic that you're covering, the number of people that you want to reach, and the resources that you have available. I hope that you found this video helpful in understanding the material on marketing information systems or marketing research. If you have any questions about what I've talked about in this video, anything discussed in the text, or anything related to the class, please do contact me so that I can try and answer those questions for you. I can't guarantee that I'll know the answer immediately, but I'll always work to try and find the answer for you. My email is chuck.lubers@usd.edu.